The blood on Fiona Fletcher's hands had long since washed away, but the stains on her soul remained permanent as the scars that traced angry lines across her back and shoulders. She stood behind the mahogany bar of the Silver Rose Saloon in Granite, Colorado, on a blistering afternoon in July of 1878, polishing glasses that did not need polishing while the summer sun beat down on the dusty mining town nestled in the Rocky Mountains. The saloon doors swung open with their familiar creak, letting in a blast of heat and a cowboy she had never seen before. Tall and lean with eyes the color of weathered denim, and a face that looked like it had seen its share of hard living, but somehow retained a gentleness around the edges. Fiona kept her gaze down as she always did, her dark auburn hair pulled back in a severe bun that revealed nothing of the woman she had been 3 years ago in Kansas City. The high-necked dress she wore, despite the oppressive heat, covered the network of scars that spider-webbed across her skin, reminders of the night she had finally fought back against the man who had promised to love her and had instead tried to kill her. She had left Marcus Brennan bleeding on the floor of their rented room, had taken nothing but the clothes on her back and the small derringer she had hidden in her hope chest, and had run until Colorado seemed far enough away from the life she wanted to forget. The cowboy approached the bar with the unhurried gait of a man who had spent more time in the saddle than on his feet. He removed his hat, revealing sun-lightened brown hair that curled slightly at the collar, and offered her a smile that reached his eyes. "Afternoon, miss. Whiskey, if you please." His voice carried a Texas drawl softened by time spent elsewhere, and Fiona found herself glancing up despite her instinct to avoid eye contact. She poured the whiskey with practiced efficiency, sliding the glass across the bar without letting their fingers touch. "2 bits," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the tinny piano music coming from the corner where old Samuel played the same 5 songs he had known for 40 years. The cowboy placed a silver dollar on the bar. "Keep the change. Name's Yancey Kane. Just rode in from a cattle drive that ended in Denver. Heard Granite might be looking for ranch hands willing to work hard for honest pay." Fiona made change anyway, stacking the coins precisely beside his glass. She had learned long ago that accepting favors, even small ones, could lead to expectations she had no intention of fulfilling. The Carmichael spread west of town usually needs hands. Mr. Patterson at the Mercantile can point you in the right direction. She turned away, signaling the end of the conversation, but Yancey Kane did not take the hint. He sipped his whiskey and settled onto the bar stool as though he planned to stay a while. "You got a name, miss? Or do folks just call you the pretty lady behind the bar?" Heat crept up Fiona's neck that had nothing to do with the summer temperature. She scrubbed at an invisible spot on the bar surface. "Fiona Fletcher. And I'm just the bartender, Mr. Kane. Nothing pretty about pouring drinks and cleaning up after miners who can't hold their liquor." "I'd have to disagree with you there," Yancey said, his tone conversational rather than flirtatious, which somehow made it worse because Fiona had learned to deflect advances, but had no defense against genuine interest. "But I can see you're busy, so I'll just enjoy my drink and not trouble you further." He kept his word, sitting quietly while the saloon filled with the evening crowd. Fiona moved through her duties with mechanical precision, pouring drinks and collecting payment while her boss, a hard-faced woman named Margaret Stone, who had given Fiona a job when she had arrived in Granite with nothing but desperation and a willingness to work, supervised from her usual table near the stairs. Margaret had her own past she never discussed, and she had recognized something kindred in Fiona's haunted eyes that first day. She had asked no questions, offered a room above the saloon, and paid fair wages. In return, Fiona worked harder than any 3 men and never caused trouble. Yancey Kane ordered a second whiskey around sunset, then a plate of the stew that Margaret's cook prepared daily in the back kitchen. He ate slowly, reading a week-old newspaper someone had left behind, and Fiona found her gaze drifting to him between customers. There was something different about him, something in the way he treated everyone with the same quiet courtesy, tipping his hat to the saloon girls who worked the floor and saying please and thank you, as though those words still mattered. When he finally stood to leave, the evening well advanced and the saloon thick with smoke and noise, he placed his hat back on his head and met Fiona's eyes directly. "Thank you for the hospitality, Miss Fletcher. I expect I'll be seeing you around if I get that job at the Carmichael place." "Good luck to you," Fiona replied, and meant it, though she hoped he would forget about her as soon as he walked out the door. She had spent 3 years building walls around herself, and she had no intention of letting anyone breach them, especially not a cowboy with kind eyes and a smile that made her remember she had once believed in things like love and future. But Yancey Kane did get the job at the Carmichael Ranch, and he did come back to the Silver Rose Saloon. He came back the next Saturday night, and the Saturday after that, always taking the same stool at the bar, always ordering the same whiskey, always leaving a generous tip despite Fiona's protests. He talked to her in the spaces between customers, sharing stories about the ranch work and asking gentle questions about granite and the mountains, and whether she had ever seen the aspens when they turned gold in autumn. Fiona answered in monosyllables at first, then in brief sentences, and finally, despite every instinct screaming at her to maintain distance, in actual conversations. She learned that Yancey had been born in Texas 26 years ago, that he had lost his parents to cholera when he was 15, that he had spent the last decade working cattle drives and ranch jobs throughout the West. He had a brother somewhere in California who he wrote letters to every few months, and he dreamed of someday having his own small spread where he could raise horses. Not cattle, he explained one warm evening in August, his third whiskey making him more talkative than usual. Horses have personality, intelligence. You can build a relationship with a horse that means something. Cattle just stand around looking at you like they're already dead and waiting for you to notice. Fiona surprised herself by laughing, a sound so unfamiliar it startled them both. She covered her mouth with her hand, but Yancey's face had lit up like she had given him a precious gift. "You should do that more often," he said softly. "Laugh, it suits you." The moment stretched between them, fragile as spun glass, until Fiona deliberately broke it by turning away to serve another customer. But something had shifted, some small crack appearing in the armor she had spent 3 years forging, and she found herself looking for Yancey Kane each Saturday evening, found herself disappointed on the rare occasions when he did not appear. September arrived with cooler temperatures, and the first hints of gold touching the aspen leaves on the mountainsides. Yancey had become a fixture at the Silver Rose, known now to the other regulars, respected for his quiet demeanor and his willingness to help break up the occasional fight without resorting to violence. He had a way of talking drunk miners down from their anger, of diffusing situations before they exploded, and Margaret Stone had taken notice. "Your cowboy is good for business," she said to Fiona one afternoon while they inventoried the liquor stock. "Fights are down since he started coming around regular. Miners behave better when they know someone's watching who they actually respect." "He's not my cowboy," Fiona protested, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. The truth was that Yancey Kane had become the highlight of her week, the one thing she looked forward to in the repetitive cycle of her days. She had started taking more care with her appearance on Saturdays, had even purchased a new dress from the dressmaker, though she still insisted on high necks and long sleeves that concealed the scars she could not bear for anyone to see. That Saturday night in mid-September, everything changed. The evening had started peacefully enough, the usual crowd drinking and playing cards while Samuel played his piano, and the saloon girls circulated through the room. Yancey sat at his customary place at the bar, telling Fiona about a wild Mustang that had been spotted in the high country. When the saloon doors burst open with enough force to crack one of them against the wall, 3 men entered, and Fiona's heart stopped beating. She knew the one in the center, knew the cruel set of his mouth and the flat deadness in his eyes. Marcus Brennan looked older than she remembered, harder, with new scars on his face that had not been there 3 years ago. But his gaze swept the saloon with the same predatory intensity she remembered from nightmares that still woke her gasping in the darkness. She dropped beneath the bar on instinct, pressing herself against the cabinet while her heart hammered against her ribs. She heard Yancey's voice, confused and concerned. "Fiona, what's wrong? Don't say my name," she whispered urgently, grabbing his wrist with trembling fingers. "Please, don't let him know I'm here." But it was too late. Marcus had heard Yancey's question, had seen her disappear behind the bar, and his laugh cut through the room like a knife. Well, Fiona Fletcher. Or is it still Fiona Brennan? We did exchange vows, after all, even if you tried to kill me before we could make them legal proper. The saloon had gone quiet, every eye turning toward the confrontation. Fiona forced herself to stand, forced herself to meet Marcus's gaze even though every instinct screamed at her to run. "We were never married," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "And I only fought back after you tried to strangle me. The scars I carry say I waited too long to defend myself." Marcus took a step forward, and Yancey stood, placing himself between Marcus and the bar. "I think you should leave," Yancey said quietly, his hand resting casually near the revolver on his hip. He wore it low and tied down, Fiona noticed for the first time, worn like a man who knew how to use it. "And who are you?" Marcus sneered. The new man warming her bed. "Did she tell you what she did? How she left me bleeding with a knife wound in my gut and ran like the coward she is?" "She told me nothing," Yancey replied, his voice still calm but carrying an edge now that made the hairs on Fiona's arms stand up. "But I know what I see. A man who tracks a woman across 3 states isn't looking for conversation, so I'll say it again. Leave. Now." Marcus's companions, 2 rough-looking men who clearly hired their guns out to whoever paid, shifted their stances. The tension in the room ratcheted higher, and Fiona saw Margaret Stone moving slowly toward the shotgun she kept behind the piano. Several miners were easing their hands toward their own weapons, and Fiona realized with a shock that they were preparing to defend her. "This isn't your fight, Cowboy," Marcus said, but his eyes had narrowed, reassessing Yancey with more caution. "The woman owes me. 3 years of searching, 3 years of her living free while I nearly died from what she done to me. That's a debt that needs settling." "The only debt here is the one you owe for terrorizing a woman," Yancey said, and his hand moved with sudden speed, his revolver clearing leather so fast Fiona barely saw the motion. The barrel pointed steady at Marcus's chest. "And I'm prepared to collect on her behalf." 2 more hammers clicked back, and Fiona saw that 2 of the miners had drawn their weapons as well, both aimed at Marcus's hired guns. Margaret stood with her shotgun leveled, and the saloon girl named Rose had produced a derringer from somewhere in her skirts. Marcus and his men were suddenly facing 5 armed people willing to shoot, and the calculation in his eyes shifted. "This ain't over," Marcus spat, but he raised his hand slowly, signaling his men to stand down. "I came a long way for what's mine, and I don't give up easy." "She's not yours," Yancey said flatly. "She's never been yours, and if you come near her again, you won't walk away. That's a promise." The standoff held for another heartbeat, then Marcus backed toward the door, his men following. "You're making a mistake," he said to Yancey. "Ask her. Ask her what she really is." Then they were gone, the saloon doors swinging shut behind them, and Fiona found she could not stop shaking. Her legs gave out, and she would have fallen if Yancey had not vaulted over the bar with surprising agility, catching her before she hit the floor. He held her gently, his arms strong but careful, and Fiona realized she was crying, years of held-back tears finally breaking through the dam she had built around her emotions. "I've got you," Yancey murmured, and somehow Fiona believed him. "You're safe. I've got you." Margaret cleared the saloon, declaring the establishment closed for the night and sending everyone home despite their protests. She locked the doors and pulled the shades, then came to where Yancey still held Fiona, now sitting on the floor behind the bar with her cradled against his chest. "Bring her upstairs," Margaret said quietly. "We need to talk about what happens next." Fiona's room was small but clean, containing a narrow bed, a washstand, a trunk for her few possessions, and a chair by the single window that overlooked the street. Yancey carried her up the stairs as though she weighed nothing, settling her carefully on the bed before stepping back to give her space. Margaret lit the lamp and closed the curtains, then sat in the chair while Yancey leaned against the wall, his expression troubled but patient. "Tell us," Margaret said gently. "Tell us what we're dealing with." So Fiona told them. She told them about meeting Marcus Brennan in Kansas City when she was 21 years old and working as a seamstress, how charming he had been at first, how he had courted her with flowers and pretty words. She told them about how his temper had emerged after he had convinced her to move into his rented rooms, how the first slap had shocked her so much she had stood frozen, unable to process that the man who claimed to love her had struck her. She told them about the escalation, the punches and kicks, the night he had taken a belt to her back and shoulders until the leather had split her skin. She told them about the isolation, how he had driven away her friends and convinced her employer she was unreliable, how he had made her dependent on him for everything. And she told them about the final night, when he had come home drunk and angry about something she could no longer remember, when his hands had closed around her throat, and she had known with absolute certainty that he intended to kill her. "I grabbed the knife from the table," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The one we used for cutting bread. I stabbed him in the stomach, and when he let go, I ran. I didn't know if he was dead or alive. I just ran. I stole a horse from outside a saloon and rode until I couldn't ride anymore. Then I sold the horse and bought a stage ticket. I changed my name. I came here and I thought I was safe." Yancey's face had gone hard as granite during her recitation, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "That wasn't attempted murder," he said flatly. "That was self-defense. You had every right to fight back." "The law might not see it that way," Margaret said practically, "especially if he's been spinning his own version of the story for 3 years. And even if the law would side with her, do you think he cares about the law? Men like that don't give up. He'll come back." "Then I'll be ready," Yancey said. "And so will half the men in this town from what I saw tonight. Fiona's made friends here whether she knows it or not." Fiona shook her head, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I can't ask anyone to fight my battles. I should just leave, go somewhere else, keep running." "No." Yancey crossed to the bed and knelt beside it, taking her hands in his. His touch was warm and solid, anchoring her to the present. "No more running. You've done nothing wrong, Fiona, nothing. That man hurt you, terrorized you, tried to kill you. You survived. You built a life here. You're not giving that up because he's too much of a coward to let you go. You don't understand, Fiona protested weakly. He's dangerous. He could hurt you, hurt anyone who tries to help me. Then he'll learn what happens when he threatens people in granite, Yancey said fiercely. This town takes care of its own, and whether you like it or not, Fiona Fletcher, you're one of our own now. Margaret nodded her agreement. Yancey's right, but we need a plan. Marcus Brennan didn't come all this way to give up after one confrontation. He'll be back, and probably with more men than the two he brought tonight. We need to be ready. They talked late into the night, forming a strategy. Margaret would speak to the sheriff in the morning, make sure he knew the situation, and understood that Marcus posed a threat not just to Fiona, but to the peace of the town. Yancey would talk to the men at the Carmichael Ranch, ensure they knew to watch for strangers asking questions. And Fiona would not be alone, not for a moment, until Marcus was dealt with one way or another. When Margaret finally left, Yancey remained, settling into the chair by the window despite Fiona's protests. I'm not leaving you unprotected, he said simply. Try to sleep. I'll keep watch. Fiona lay on the bed fully clothed, staring at the ceiling while exhaustion warred with fear. Why are you doing this? She asked into the darkness. You barely know me. We've shared some conversations over drinks, but that's all. Why would you risk yourself for me? The silence stretched so long she thought perhaps Yancey had fallen asleep. Then his voice came, low and honest. Because from the first moment I walked into this saloon, I saw something in you. Something wounded but not broken. Something beautiful that was trying hard not to be seen. And every Saturday night since then, I've come back hoping you'd let me see a little more of who you really are. He paused, and Fiona heard him shift in the chair. I know what it's like to lose everything, Fiona. When my parents died, I was angry at the world, angry at God, angry at myself for not being able to save them. I spent years just drifting, not caring about tomorrow because yesterday hurt too much. Then one day I woke up and realized I had a choice. I could keep drifting or I could find something worth staying for. And you think I'm worth staying for? Fiona whispered, her heart hammering. I think you're worth a lot of things, Yancey replied quietly. But mostly, I think you're worth the chance to stop hiding, to stop being afraid. To live instead of just surviving. Fiona closed her eyes, and despite everything, despite the fear and the uncertainty and the knowledge that Marcus was out there somewhere planning his next move, she felt something unfurl in her chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. She must have slept eventually, because she woke to dawn light filtering through the curtains and the smell of coffee. Yancey was still in the chair, his hat pulled low over his eyes, but his hand rested on his revolver, and she knew he had kept his word to stay awake and watch over her. The coffee smell was coming from Margaret, who entered carrying a tray with 2 cups and some bread and jam. Sheriff Morrison is coming by after breakfast, Margaret said quietly, setting the tray on the small table. I sent word early. He's a good man, Fiona. He'll help. Fiona sat up, running her hands over her face. What can he do? Marcus hasn't broken any laws here. Not yet. He threatened you in front of witnesses, Yancey said, pushing his hat back and accepting a cup of coffee from Margaret with a nod of thanks. That's enough for the sheriff to have a talk with him. Make it clear he's not welcome to cause trouble. Sheriff Jack Morrison arrived an hour later, a weathered man in his 50s with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He listened to Fiona's story without interruption, his expression growing grimmer as she spoke. When she finished, he sat back and drummed his fingers on the table. Can't arrest him for something that happened in Kansas City 3 years ago, he said finally. Especially when it sounds like you were well within your rights to defend yourself. But I can have a conversation with Mr. Brennan and his friends. Make it clear that harassment won't be tolerated in my town, and I can ask around, see what I can learn about him. A man doesn't track someone across 3 states unless he's obsessed, and obsessed men tend to have left a trail of trouble behind them. Thank you, Sheriff, Fiona said gratefully. Morrison stood, settling his hat on his head. One more thing. Don't go anywhere alone until this is resolved. Mr. Kane here seems willing to play bodyguard, and I'll make sure my deputies keep an eye on the saloon. But you need to be smart and cautious, Miss Fletcher. Men like Brennan don't back down easy, and I'd rather prevent trouble than clean up after it. The next few days passed in tense anticipation. Fiona worked at the saloon with Yancey always nearby, either sitting at the bar or standing by the door or playing cards with minors who had appointed themselves her unofficial guard. Marcus did not return, but his presence hung over everything like a dark cloud. Sheriff Morrison reported that Marcus and his men had taken rooms at the boarding house on the edge of town, that they were asking questions about Fiona, about her habits and schedule. The sheriff had indeed had his conversation with Marcus, had made the town's position clear, but Marcus had simply nodded and said he was waiting for the right moment to speak privately with his wife. I corrected him on that point, Morrison said grimly. Told him in front of witnesses that you were never married and that you had no obligation to speak with him about anything. He didn't like it, but he couldn't argue the facts. Yancey had moved into the room next to Fiona's above the saloon, paying Margaret for the week. He escorted Fiona to and from work, walked with her on the rare occasions she needed to visit the mercantile or the dressmaker, and sat with her during her meals. The forced proximity should have been uncomfortable, but instead Fiona found herself relaxing in his presence, the tension that had held her rigid for 3 years slowly unwinding. They talked about everything and nothing. Yancey told her about his childhood in Texas, about his mother's laugh and his father's patient teaching, about the brother he missed. Fiona told him about growing up in Ohio, about her parents who had died of influenza when she was 19, about her dream of opening her own dress shop someday. They discovered a shared love of reading, borrowing books from each other, and discussing them over breakfast. They found they both believed in second chances, in the possibility of redemption, in the basic goodness of people despite all evidence to the contrary. And slowly, carefully, Fiona began to trust, not just Yancey, but herself. She began to believe that perhaps she did deserve safety, deserve kindness, deserve the possibility of something more than just survival. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after Marcus's first appearance, Yancey convinced Fiona to walk with him up into the foothills to watch the sunset. Sheriff Morrison had reported that Marcus and his men had ridden out that morning, ostensibly heading toward Denver, though no one trusted that they were truly gone. Still, with 2 deputies following at a discreet distance and Yancey's revolver on his hip, Fiona agreed. The aspen leaves had turned fully gold now, shimmering in the slanting light like coins scattered across the mountainside. They found a flat rock overlooking granite, the town small and peaceful below them, and sat together watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. I never thought I'd feel safe again, Fiona said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. After Kansas City, I thought fear was just going to be my constant companion for the rest of my life. Yancey turned to look at her, his expression serious. And now I think maybe fear doesn't have to be in charge, Fiona replied. She pulled at a thread on her sleeve nervously, gathering courage. Yancey, why haven't you asked to see them? The scars. I know you must be curious. It's not my business unless you want it to be, Yancey said simply. Scars are just proof you survived something that tried to destroy you. They don't define you, Fiona. They're just part of your story, and everyone has parts of their story they'd rather forget. Fiona felt tears prick her eyes, but these were different from the tears of fear and shame she had cried so many times before. These were tears of relief, of recognition, of being seen and accepted exactly as she was. "Would you like to see them?" she asked quietly. "I think I'd like to show you." "If that's all right." "Only if you're sure," Yancey said gently. Fiona stood and with trembling fingers began unbuttoning the high neck of her dress. She slipped it off her shoulders, revealing the chemise beneath and the network of scars that crossed her back and shoulders like a roadmap of suffering. She heard Yancey's sharp intake of breath, but did not turn around, could not bear to see pity or disgust in his eyes. Then she felt his fingertips feather light, tracing one of the longer scars. "Beautiful," he whispered, and Fiona's breath caught. "Not the scars. You survived this. You survived him. You're the strongest person I've ever met, Fiona Fletcher." She turned then, pulling her dress back into place, and found his eyes full of something that looked like wonder. "I'm not strong," she protested. "I ran, I hid." "You lived," Yancey corrected, reaching up to cup her face gently. "You refused to let him destroy you completely. That's not weakness. That's the kind of strength most people never have to find." The kiss, when it came, was inevitable as sunrise. Yancey's lips were gentle against hers, asking rather than demanding, and Fiona found herself responding, found herself leaning into the warmth of him. This was nothing like the brutal claiming Marcus had called love. This was tender and questioning and full of promise, and when they finally pulled apart, Fiona was breathless. "I'm falling in love with you," Yancey said, the words simple and honest. "I know the timing is terrible and complicated and probably the last thing you need right now. But I believe in honesty, and I wanted you to know, no pressure, no expectations, just the truth." Fiona pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heart race. "I think I'm falling in love with you too," she admitted. "It terrifies me. After Marcus, I swore I'd never let anyone close again, but you make me want to be brave enough to try." They stayed on the mountainside until the stars emerged, talking about futures that might be possible, about dreams that seemed less impossible with someone to share them. The deputies remained at their discreet distance, and when they finally walked back down to Granite, Fiona felt lighter than she had in years. That lightness shattered 3 nights later when Marcus returned. The saloon was crowded, a Saturday night in early October with miners celebrating payday. Fiona was behind the bar, Yancey beside her helping wash glasses when the doors opened and Marcus walked in. But this time he was not alone. He had brought 6 men with him, all armed, all wearing the hard expressions of hired killers. The saloon went quiet. Sheriff Morrison stood from his table, his hand on his weapon. "I thought I made it clear you weren't welcome here, Brennan." "I'm not here for trouble, Sheriff," Marcus said, but his smile was cold. "I'm here to collect my property. Last I checked, a man had a right to his wife." "We've been over this," Morrison said firmly. "Miss Fletcher is not your wife and not your property. You need to leave. Now." "Can't do that," Marcus replied. "See, I've got a legal document here." He pulled a folded paper from his coat. "Marriage certificate from Kansas City, dated 4 years ago. Makes Fiona my wife under the law, which means she needs to come with me. Peacefully, I hope, but one way or another she's leaving with me tonight." Fiona's hands had gone numb. "That's a forgery," she said, her voice shaking. "We were never married. I would never have married you." "Your word against mine," Marcus said, "and I've got witnesses who'll swear otherwise. So what's it going to be, Sheriff? You going to interfere with a man's legal right to his wife? Because that could get messy." Morrison's jaw tightened. "Let me see that certificate." As Marcus moved forward, everything happened at once. One of his men pulled a gun, clearly intending to create enough chaos for Marcus to grab Fiona. But Yancey was faster, his revolver clearing leather and firing before the hired gun could fully aim. The shot took the man in the shoulder, spinning him backward, and suddenly the saloon exploded into action. Morrison's deputies, who had been stationed throughout the room, drew their weapons. The miners who had befriended Fiona scattered to cover or pulled their own guns. Marcus's men found themselves facing twice their number of armed opponents, all willing to shoot. "Stand down," Morrison roared. "Everyone stand down or I'll arrest every last one of you." The standoff held, gunsmoke drifting through the air, the wounded man groaning on the floor. Marcus's eyes darted around the room, recalculating once again, and Fiona saw the moment when he realized he was outmatched and outmaneuvered. "You can't protect her forever," Marcus snarled, but he signaled his men to holster their weapons. "She's mine. She'll always be mine. And one day you'll let your guard down and I'll be there." "No," Fiona said, and was surprised by the strength in her own voice. She stepped out from behind the bar, Yancey immediately moving to her side. "I am not yours. I have never been yours. You hurt me, you terrorized me, you tried to kill me, but I survived, and I'm not running anymore. This is my home. These are my people. And if you come near me again, if you threaten anyone in this town again, I will shoot you myself. And this time I won't aim for your stomach." The promise in her words rang through the saloon. Marcus stared at her, seeming to really see her for the first time, and something shifted in his expression. Perhaps he finally understood that the broken woman he had created no longer existed. Perhaps he realized that Fiona had found something stronger than fear. "Your choice," he said finally, "but don't say I didn't try to make this easy." Sheriff Morrison stepped forward. "Actually, it's my choice. And I'm choosing to arrest you, Marcus Brennan, for assault, for presenting a forged legal document, for conspiracy to commit kidnapping, and for disturbing the peace. Your men can leave town peacefully or join you in a cell. Their choice." Morrison's deputies moved in, disarming Marcus and his men efficiently. The hired guns, seeing their employer arrested and their cause lost, chose to ride out. Marcus resisted, shouting threats and accusations, but Morrison was unmoved. They hauled him out of the saloon and toward the jail, his curses fading into the night. The saloon remained frozen for a long moment, then erupted into cheers. Miners clapped Fiona on the back. Saloon girls hugged her, and Margaret appeared with a bottle of her best whiskey. "Drinks on the house," she announced. "Let's celebrate Fiona's freedom." But Fiona could not celebrate yet. Her knees were shaking, her hands trembling, the reality of what had just happened crashing over her. Yancey saw her distress and immediately guided her toward the stairs, away from the crowd, up to her room where she could breathe. "He's gone," Yancey said, holding her while she shook. "He's arrested. He can't hurt you anymore. What if he escapes? What if the charges don't stick? What if he comes back?" The questions tumbled out, 3 years of fear refusing to let go so easily. "Then we deal with it," Yancey said firmly. "Together. You're not alone in this anymore, Fiona. You've got me, you've got Margaret, you've got half the town willing to stand between you and harm. Marcus Brennan is finished. He just doesn't know it yet." Sheriff Morrison visited the next morning with news. The marriage certificate had indeed been a forgery, and a clumsy one at that. More importantly, Morrison had sent telegrams to Kansas City and received responses that painted a grim picture of Marcus Brennan. He was wanted for questioning in connection with 2 other women who had disappeared, women he had been involved with. The Kansas City police were very interested in speaking with him. "He's going to prison," Morrison said with satisfaction. "If not for what he did to you, then for what he did to those other women. Either way, he won't be troubling you again." The relief was overwhelming. Fiona cried, not from fear this time, but from the release of 3 years of constant tension. It felt like removing an impossibly heavy weight from her shoulders, like being able to breathe fully for the first time since she had fled Kansas City. Over the following weeks, as autumn deepened and the first snows dusted the peaks above Granite, Fiona began to truly heal. Marcus was transferred to Kansas City to face charges there, and word came back that evidence had been found linking him to the disappearances. He would spend the rest of his life in prison if he was lucky, and face the hangman if he was not. With that threat finally removed, Fiona found herself able to think about the future in concrete terms. She began saving money with new purpose, researching what it would take to open a dress shop. She bought fabric and patterns and started sewing again in her spare time, creating pieces she had only dreamed about during the years of hiding. And she allowed herself to explore the growing feelings between her and Yancey Kane. They courted properly, with walks through town and dinners at the hotel restaurant and Sunday afternoons spent reading together in Margaret's private parlor. Yancey was patient and gentle, never pushing for more than Fiona was ready to give, content to build trust slowly and carefully. He told her about his dreams for a horse ranch, and she told him about her dreams for a dress shop, and they began to imagine how those dreams might fit together. On a cold November evening, with the first real snow of winter falling softly outside, Yancey knocked on Fiona's door holding a small box. She opened it to find him looking nervous, an unusual expression on his normally confident face. "I know this might be too soon," he said without preamble. "And I know you've got every reason to be cautious about commitments, but I can't keep pretending I don't want forever with you, Fiona Fletcher." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small sapphire set in it. "This was my mother's ring. My father gave it to me before he died, said to save it for someone who made me believe in tomorrow. You're that someone. You make me believe in all kinds of tomorrows, so I'm asking, would you consider marrying me? No pressure, no rush, just think about it." Fiona stared at the ring, her heart racing. 6 months ago, the thought of marriage would have sent her running, but this was not Marcus's manipulation and control. This was Yancey's honest hope, offered freely with no strings attached. This was a man who had seen her scars and called her beautiful, who had stood between her and danger without hesitation, who had shown her through countless small actions that love could be gentle and respectful and safe. "Yes," she heard herself say, and then louder, more certain. "Yes, Yancey Kane, I'll marry you." The joy on his face was worth every moment of fear and pain that had come before. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as though his mother had known somehow that one day it would belong to a seamstress from Ohio with scars on her back and hope finally rekindling in her heart. They were married on a crisp December morning with snow blanketing the streets of Granite. The ceremony took place in the small church at the edge of town, with Margaret standing as Fiona's witness and half the men from the Carmichael Ranch attending as Yancey's. Sheriff Morrison gave Fiona away, and even the dower minister seemed moved by the obvious love shining between the bride and groom. Fiona wore a dress she had made herself, a beautiful creation of ivory silk with delicate embroidery at the cuffs and collar. The high neck concealed her scars, but she had told Yancey she was ready to stop hiding them, at least from people she trusted. He had kissed her forehead and said she should do whatever made her comfortable, that there was no right or wrong way to heal. The wedding breakfast was held at the Silver Rose Saloon, Margaret closing the establishment to the public for the day and transforming it into a proper celebration space. There was food and music and dancing, and Fiona found herself laughing freely. surrounded by people who had become her family by choice rather than blood. As evening approached and the party wound down, Yancey and Fiona retreated to the room they would now share above the saloon. Yancey had insisted they take time before moving to the small house he had rented at the edge of town, wanting Fiona to have familiar surroundings as they began their married life. It was another small kindness in a long string of kindnesses, and Fiona loved him more for it. Their wedding night was tender and careful, Yancey patient with Fiona's nervousness, his touch gentle and reverent. He traced the scars on her back with his fingertips and lips, silently honoring everything she had survived. And when they finally came together, Fiona felt no fear, only joy and connection and the profound relief of finally being able to trust someone completely. Winter passed slowly. The mountain town locked in snow and ice, but Fiona had never been warmer. She and Yancey settled into married life with surprising ease, learning each other's rhythms and habits. Fiona continued working at the Silver Rose through January, saving every penny toward her dress shop dream. Yancey worked at the Carmichael Ranch, learning everything he could about breeding and training horses. In February, an opportunity arose that changed everything. The building next to the Mercantile, which had stood empty for 2 years after a fire damaged the back rooms, came up for sale. It was larger than Fiona needed for a dress shop, but perfectly positioned on Granite's Main Street. She and Yancey walked through it on a cold afternoon, Fiona's practical eye seeing past the damage to the potential beneath. "The front room could be the shop," she said, her voice rising with excitement. "Display space and customer area. The middle room could be my sewing room and the back rooms could be repaired and used for storage. Or," she paused, glancing at Yancey, "or one could be an office for managing a horse breeding business." Yancey's eyes widened. "You'd want to combine our businesses." "Why not?" Fiona said. "We're partners in everything else. Might as well be partners in work too. Besides, you'll need somewhere to keep records and meet with potential buyers. And I'll need someone to manage the financial side while I focus on sewing. We could make this work, Yancey. Together." They bought the building with their combined savings and a loan from the bank, Sheriff Morrison standing as their guarantor. Renovations began immediately, the townspeople pitching in to help. By April, as the snow melted and the first wildflowers appeared in the meadows, Fletcher Fine Goods and Kane Horse Trading opened its doors. The combination proved inspired. Ladies came to commission dresses, and their husbands discussed horse purchases with Yancey. Ranchers came to look at breeding stock, and their wives browsed Fiona's ready-made garments. The business thrived beyond their most optimistic projections, and by summer they had hired 2 assistants, a young woman to help with sewing and a ranch hand to assist Yancey with the horses he was beginning to breed on a piece of land they leased north of town. In August, Fiona realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She had never allowed herself to think about children during her years of hiding, had never imagined she would feel safe enough to bring a life into the world. But here she was, carrying Yancey's child, and the future that had once seemed impossible now stretched before her bright with possibility. Yancey was overjoyed, immediately becoming protective in the most endearing ways. He insisted Fiona rest more, hired another assistant for the shop, and spent his evenings reading aloud from a book about childbirth and infant care that he had ordered from Denver. His concern was sweet rather than controlling, always checking what Fiona needed rather than assuming he knew best. "I'm not made of glass," she told him one evening in September, laughing at his expression when she suggested moving some bolts of fabric. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I'll be fine." "I know," Yancey said, pulling her close. "But you're my woman having my baby, and I'm allowed to worry a little. It's my job as the father." Their son was born on a cold March morning in 1880, arriving after a long but relatively uncomplicated labor. They named him Thomas, after Yancey's father, and watching Yancey hold the tiny infant with such wonder and tenderness made Fiona's heart feel too large for her chest. This was what love was supposed to look like. This was the family she had once thought she would never have. Thomas was a healthy, loud baby who quickly became the darling of Granite. He spent his days in a cradle in the shop while Fiona sewed, and everyone who entered wanted to peek at the baby and offer advice. Margaret declared herself an honorary grandmother and visited daily. Sheriff Morrison whittled wooden toys. The Saloon girls brought tiny knitted caps and booties. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, Fiona found herself healing in ways she had not known were possible. The nightmares that had plagued her for years faded to occasional bad dreams. The instinct to flinch from sudden movements disappeared. The scars on her back remained, physical reminders of what she had survived, but they no longer defined her. She was Fiona Kane now, businesswoman and wife and mother, and the past was simply that, past. In 1882, they expanded their business again, purchasing the land they had been leasing and building a proper ranch house and barn. Yancey's horse breeding operation had grown beyond their most ambitious dreams, his animals sought after throughout Colorado for their intelligence and temperament. Fiona's dress shop had similarly thrived, her designs becoming known for their quality and elegant simplicity. They moved into the ranch house that summer, and Fiona discovered a love for ranch life she had not expected. She maintained the dress shop, but hired a manager to handle day-to-day operations, giving herself time to help with the horses and raise Thomas, and simply enjoy the life she had built. She learned to ride, something she had never done before, and found freedom in galloping across the meadows with the mountains rising majestic around her. Their daughter was born in 1883, a tiny, dark-haired girl they named Alina after Fiona's mother. Thomas, now 3 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister, spending hours watching her sleep and insisting on helping with every aspect of her care. The ranch house filled with laughter and noise and the beautiful chaos of family life. On a warm evening in September of 1884, Fiona stood on the porch of their ranch house watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Thomas was playing with wooden horses in the yard while Yancey held baby Alina, pointing out the evening star just appearing above the mountains. 6 years had passed since Marcus Brennan had walked into the Silver Rose Saloon. 6 years since her world had turned upside down in the best possible way. She thought about the woman she had been then, scared and scarred and certain she would never be whole again. She thought about how close she had come to running, to giving up on the possibility of happiness. And she thought about the man who had walked through that saloon door and somehow seen past her carefully constructed walls to the person she could become. Yancey looked up and caught her watching, his smile bright and warm. "What are you thinking about?" he called. "Everything," Fiona replied honestly. "How much has changed, how lucky I am." "We're lucky," Yancey corrected, walking over with Alina still in his arms. Thomas followed, wrapping his arms around Fiona's legs. "All of us. Lucky we found each other." That night, after the children were asleep and the ranch settled into peaceful quiet, Fiona and Yancey sat together on the porch watching the stars emerge one by one. They held hands, comfortable in the silence that only comes with deep familiarity, and Fiona thought about futures and pasts and the present moment that contained them both. "You ever regret it?" Yancey asked quietly. "Staying in Granite," facing Marcus instead of running. Fiona considered the question seriously. I regret what happened to me in Kansas City. I regret the years I lost to fear, but I don't regret staying here. This is home. Your home. Our children, our business, our life together. This is everything I never knew I could have. Good, Yancey said, bringing her hand to his lips. Because I plan on spending the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me. That works both ways, Fiona replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. I plan on making sure you never regret walking into that saloon 6 years ago. Impossible, Yancey murmured. That was the luckiest day of my life. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of joy and challenge, triumph and struggle. The horse ranch prospered beyond their wildest expectations, Yancey's reputation as a breeder spreading throughout the West. The dress shop remained successful under its capable manager, and Fiona still designed special pieces for important occasions, her work sought after by wealthy ladies from Denver to Pueblo. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved both the horses and his mother's sketches of dress designs. Eleanor was wild and adventurous, following her father everywhere, and declaring at age 4 that she would be a cowgirl when she grew up. In 1887, they welcomed another son, James, and their family felt complete. Margaret Stone retired from running the Silver Rose Saloon in 1888, selling the establishment but staying in Granite. She was a fixture at the Kane Ranch, the children calling her Grandma Margaret and running to her with their troubles and triumphs. Sheriff Morrison remained a close friend, watching the children grow with avuncular pride. Through it all, Fiona and Yancey's love deepened and matured. They weathered hard winters and economic downturns, sick children and difficult decisions, but they weathered them together. They had learned to communicate honestly, to support each other's dreams, to forgive quickly and love fiercely. They had built not just a life, but a partnership that honored them both. On their 10th wedding anniversary, in December of 1889, Yancey surprised Fiona with a trip to Denver. They left the children with Margaret and spent 3 days in the city, staying in a fancy hotel and attending the theater and eating in restaurants where the food was served on fine china. It was magical and romantic, but Fiona found herself eager to return home to their ranch and their children and the life they had created together. I never imagined this, she told Yancey on the train ride back to Granite, watching the mountains grow closer through the window. When I was hiding behind that saloon bar, terrified of my own shadow, I never imagined I could have this much happiness. You deserved it all along, Yancey said, taking her hand. You just needed to believe it yourself. You helped me believe it, Fiona said. You and this town and the life we built. I'm not the same person I was when you walked into the Silver Rose. That woman was barely surviving. Now I'm living. Really living. In 1891, the town of Granite honored Yancey and Fiona as Citizens of the Year for their contributions to the community. The dress shop employed 6 people now, and the horse ranch employed 12. They donated regularly to the church and the school, had helped fund a new library, and were known for their generosity to families in need. The ceremony was held in the town hall, and as Fiona stood beside Yancey accepting the recognition, she looked out at the faces of their friends and neighbors and felt a profound sense of belonging. This was her town. These were her people. She was no longer hiding behind the saloon door. She was standing in the center of her community, acknowledged and valued, her past no longer a source of shame but simply one chapter in a much larger story. Thomas turned 12 in 1892, old enough now to take on real responsibilities at the ranch. He showed a natural gift for working with horses, inheriting his father's patience and gentle touch. Eleanor, at 9, was indeed becoming the cowgirl she had promised, able to ride as well as any of the ranch hands and fearless in her approach to life. James, at 5, was still finding his place but showed signs of artistic talent that reminded Fiona of herself at that age. Watching her children grow and thrive, Fiona sometimes thought about the what-ifs. What if she had not fought back that night in Kansas City? What if Marcus had killed her? What if she had kept running instead of staying in Granite? What if Yancey had walked into a different saloon in a different town? But those thoughts never lingered long because the reality of her present was so much better than any alternative. She had found love when she thought love was impossible. She had found safety when she had been certain she would live in fear forever. She had found a home and a purpose and a future bright with promise. In 1895, on a warm May afternoon, Fiona stood in the yard of their ranch house watching Yancey work with a young stallion in the corral. He moved with the confidence born of long practice, his connection with the animal almost magical. At 43 years old, he was still lean and strong, his face weathered by sun and wind, but as handsome to her as it had been the day he first walked into the saloon. Thomas was helping, his height and build now nearly matching his father's. Eleanor was supposed to be helping too, but had gotten distracted playing with James near the barn. The scene was so perfectly ordinary, so beautifully mundane, that Fiona felt tears prick her eyes. Yancey noticed and vaulted over the corral fence with easy grace, crossing to where she stood. "What's wrong?" he asked, concern immediate in his voice. "Nothing's wrong," Fiona assured him, reaching up to touch his face. "Everything's right. That's what made me cry, just looking at our life and realizing how incredibly right everything turned out." Yancey pulled her close, and Fiona rested her head against his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart. "We made it right," he said quietly. "Together. You with your courage, me with my stubborn refusal to let you push me away. We fought for this, Fiona, for each other and for this life. We earned it." "Yes," Fiona agreed, smiling through her tears. "We did." That evening, after the children were in bed, Fiona pulled out the dress she had worn her first night working at the Silver Rose Saloon. She kept it in the back of her closet, a reminder of where she had started. The high neck and long sleeves had been her armor then, protecting her secrets and her scars from the world. She held it up, remembering the terrified woman who had worn it, and felt a rush of compassion for her younger self. "You should burn that," Yancey said from the doorway. "You don't need it anymore." Fiona shook her head. "I don't need it as armor anymore, but I want to keep it as a reminder of how far I've come, of what I survived." She hung the dress back in the closet, then turned to her husband with a smile. "Besides, I like remembering the night you walked into that saloon. Best thing that ever happened to me." "Second best," Yancey corrected, pulling her into his arms. "Best thing was you being brave enough to let me stay." As the years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children and the steady expansion of their ranch, Fiona found herself occasionally thinking about Marcus Brennan. He had died in prison in 1886. She had learned through a telegram from Kansas City authorities. The news had brought closure, but also a strange sort of sadness. Not for him, but for the man he might have been if he had chosen differently, if he had valued love over control and partnership over possession. She thought about the other women he had hurt, the ones who had not survived to build new lives. She thought about how close she had come to being one of them, how a few different choices could have led to a completely different ending. And she felt grateful, deeply and profoundly grateful, for every person who had helped her along the way. Margaret, who had given her a job and never asked questions. Sheriff Morrison, who had stood between her and danger. The townspeople who had chosen to protect her. And most of all, Yancey, who had seen her worth when she could not see it herself. In 1898, Thomas announced his intention to marry Sarah Patterson, daughter of the mercantile owner. He was 18, Sarah 17, and they had been courting for 2 years with the full approval of both families. The wedding was planned for October, and Fiona threw herself into creating the perfect dress for her future daughter-in-law. As she sewed, she thought about how different this wedding would be from her own rushed elopement with Yancey. Thomas and Sarah would start their marriage with the support of family and community, with no secrets or shame, with nothing but hope and love to build upon. It was everything she had wanted for her children, this freedom to love openly and joyfully. The wedding was beautiful, held in the same church where Fiona and Yancey had married 18 years earlier. Watching her son pledge his life to his bride, Fiona felt the last pieces of her old pain finally fade away. The cycle had been broken. Her children would never know the fear and suffering she had experienced. They would grow up understanding that love was gentle and respectful, that partnership meant equality, that family was something to cherish rather than fear. Eleanor, at 15, was already showing signs of inheriting her mother's business acumen. She talked about opening a ranch of her own someday, about breeding horses specifically for women riders. Yancey encouraged her ambitions, teaching her everything he knew about the business side of ranching. Fiona watched their interactions with pride, seeing in her daughter the confidence and self-assurance she herself had taken so long to develop. James, at 11, remained the artist of the family. He filled sketchbooks with drawings of horses and mountains and scenes from ranch life. Fiona taught him about design and composition, and Yancey taught him that men could have gentle hearts and creative souls. Together they were raising a son who understood that strength came in many forms. In 1900, as the new century dawned, Fiona and Yancey celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary. Their children arranged a surprise party at the ranch, inviting friends from throughout the region. The house overflowed with people and laughter and love, and Fiona moved through the crowd feeling overwhelmed by the richness of her life. During a quiet moment, she slipped outside to the porch, needing a brief respite from the noise. Yancey found her there as she had known he would, and joined her in watching the stars that filled the Colorado sky. 20 years, he said softly, feels like both forever and no time at all. I know what you mean, Fiona replied, leaning against him. Some days I can barely remember my life before you. Other days I remember it all too clearly, and I'm amazed at how much has changed. Do you still have nightmares? Yancey asked. He rarely brought up her past anymore, respecting her desire to leave it behind, but tonight felt like a time for honesty. Rarely, Fiona admitted. Maybe once or twice a year now, and they're not as intense as they used to be. Mostly I dream about the future these days. About grandchildren and growing old with you and all the years we still have ahead of us. Lots of years, Yancey agreed. We're only in our 40s, Fiona. We've got decades left to make more memories. And they did make more memories, years full of them. They watched Thomas and Sarah welcome their first child in 1899, a daughter named Fiona who captured everyone's hearts immediately. They watched Eleanor graduate from the new women's college in Colorado Springs and return to start her own horse ranch, partnering with her father and building a successful business breeding and training horses specifically for women riders. James discovered his calling as a botanical illustrator. His detailed drawings of mountain wildflowers eventually published in a book that brought recognition to both him and the Colorado wilderness. He married a quiet schoolteacher named Anna in 1906, and they built a home on the edge of the Kane property where James could paint and Anna could teach the children of local ranching families. Through all these years, through the joys and sorrows and everyday moments that make up a life, Fiona and Yancey remained partners in every sense of the word. They disagreed sometimes, argued occasionally, but they never stopped choosing each other, never stopped working together to build the life they wanted. In 1910, on a golden September afternoon much like the one when they had first walked into the foothills to watch the sunset, Fiona and Yancey returned to that same spot. They were older now, both in their late 50s, their hair showing gray and their faces lined with the marks of time. But their hands still fit together perfectly, and their hearts still beat in rhythm. "You remember what you told me that first time we came up here?" Yancey asked, looking out over the valley where granite nestled among the mountains. "I said I never thought I'd feel safe again," Fiona replied. "And you showed me I could. You showed me I deserved to feel safe and loved and happy." "We showed each other," Yancey corrected gently. "You taught me just as much, Fiona. You taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear but the decision to move forward despite it. You taught me that healing is possible, that people can rebuild themselves after devastation. You taught me what real strength looks like." Fiona turned to face her husband fully, taking both his hands in hers. "I hid my scars and my past behind that saloon door," she said, echoing words she had thought many times over the years. "And you walked in and saw only my future. Thank you, Yancey Kane. Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself." "Thank you for letting me stay," Yancey replied, pulling her close. "For being brave enough to trust again. For building this life with me." They stood together as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in the same brilliant colors it had 32 years earlier. But everything else had changed. The terrified woman who had hidden behind the saloon bar no longer existed. In her place stood Fiona Kane, wife and mother and grandmother, business owner and pillar of her community, a woman who had transformed her pain into purpose and her survival into thriving. The scars still marked her back, physical reminders of the suffering she had endured. But they were only one part of her story now, not the whole of it. The whole story included the saloon where she had found refuge, the cowboy who had offered her hope, the town that had become her home, and the family she had built from the broken pieces of her past. As they walked back down the mountain toward the ranch house where their family waited, Fiona felt a deep and abiding peace. She had survived. She had healed. She had loved and been loved in return. She had built a future so bright and full that her past could no longer cast shadows on it. In 1918, as Fiona approached her 66th birthday, she stood once more at the window of the ranch house watching Yancey work with horses in the corral. The scene was achingly familiar, played out thousands of times over the decades of their marriage. But today felt different, significant in some way she could not quite name. Thomas approached, his own hair graying now, his oldest daughter at his side. "Mother, we need to talk about something," he said gently. Fiona turned from the window, her heart clenching with sudden fear. "What's wrong? Is someone ill?" "No, nothing like that," Thomas assured her quickly. "It's just that Father isn't getting any younger, neither are you. We think it might be time to hire more help at the ranch, let you both slow down a bit." Fiona wanted to protest, to insist they were still perfectly capable, but looking at her son's concerned face, she realized he was right. She was tired more easily these days, and Yancey's movements had lost some of their former fluid grace. They were getting old, both of them, and while that felt impossible given how quickly the years had flown, it was nonetheless true. "Your father won't like it," she said finally. "He's worked with horses his whole life. He won't want to give it up." "He won't have to give it up," Thomas said. "Just share the load. Let the next generation take on more responsibility. Eleanor's already running her ranch successfully. I'm ready to take over more of the daily operations here. We're not pushing you out, Mother. We're just making sure you and Father have time to enjoy the life you've built." So they hired more help and delegated more responsibilities. And slowly, Fiona and Yancey transitioned into a new phase of their life together. They spent their days reading and taking leisurely rides through the mountains and visiting with their ever-growing collection of grandchildren. They traveled occasionally, visiting James in the beautiful home he had built with Anna, spending time at Eleanor's ranch watching her train horses with the same gentle skill her father had taught her. On their 40th wedding anniversary in December of 1919, the entire family gathered at the ranch house for a celebration. Children and grandchildren filled every room, the noise and chaos and love almost overwhelming. Fiona looked around at the faces of the people she loved, at the family she and Yancey had created together, and felt such profound gratitude it brought tears to her eyes. "Happy, Mrs. Kane?" Yancey asked, appearing at her elbow with 2 glasses of champagne someone had brought from Denver for the occasion. "Deliriously," Fiona replied, accepting the glass. "I keep thinking about that scared woman who hid behind the bar of the Silver Rose Saloon. She never could have imagined this. All of this. She survived so we could have this," Yancey said seriously. "Every difficult choice she made, every moment she chose to keep going despite the fear led to this moment right here. You should be proud of her, Fiona. I am." They raised their glasses in a private toast, their eyes meeting over the rims. 40 years of marriage, 40 years of partnership and love and choosing each other every single day. It had not always been easy, but it had always been worth it. Later that evening, after the party had wound down and most of the family had departed for their own homes, Fiona and Yancey sat together in front of the fireplace in their bedroom. The fire crackled softly, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and outside the window snow was beginning to fall. "Do you have any regrets?" Fiona asked, a question she had asked before over the years but one that felt important to ask again now. "Only one," Yancey said, and Fiona's heart clenched until he continued. "I regret that I didn't walk into that saloon sooner. That you had to spend 3 years hiding before I found you, but I don't regret a single moment since then." "I don't either," Fiona said softly. "Not one moment. You gave me back my life, Yancey. You gave me back myself. Everything good that's happened since that night in the saloon exists because you chose to see me, really see me, when I was trying so hard to be invisible." "We saved each other," Yancey said, pulling her close. "I was drifting before I met you, just going through the motions. You gave me purpose and direction. You gave me a reason to build something permanent instead of just wandering from job to job. We built this life together, Fiona. Equal partners from the start." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn low, and Fiona thought about all the versions of herself she had been over the course of her life. The innocent young seamstress in Kansas City who had believed love was enough to overcome anything. The battered woman who had finally found the courage to fight back. The terrified fugitive who had hidden behind the saloon bar with her high-necked dresses and her carefully averted eyes. The slowly healing woman who had dared to trust a kind cowboy with gentle eyes. The wife and mother and businesswoman who had built an empire from nothing but determination and skill. The grandmother who watched the next generation with pride and hope. All those versions existed within her still, each one a layer in the complex person she had become. The scars remained on her back, but they had long since ceased to define her. They were simply proof that she had survived, that she had refused to let Marcus Brennan destroy her completely. In 1923, Yancey suffered a heart attack while working with a young horse. He survived, but his recovery was slow and incomplete. The doctors said he would need to take things easy, avoid physical exertion, accept that his body could no longer do everything his spirit wanted. It was a difficult transition for a man who had spent his entire life in constant motion, but Yancey faced it with characteristic grace. Fiona became his caregiver, a role she embraced with the same fierce devotion she had brought to every aspect of their life together. She helped him with tasks that had once been simple, encouraged him through the frustration of his limitations, and reminded him daily that he was more than what his body could do. They had been partners for 44 years by then, and she had no intention of letting him face this challenge alone. "I'm slowing you down," Yancey said one afternoon, frustration clear in his voice. "You should be out enjoying life, not stuck here watching an old man struggle to climb stairs." "First, you're not that old. Second, I am enjoying life," Fiona said firmly. "Being with you is the life I want, Yancey Kane. Whether we're galloping across meadows or sitting quietly on the porch, whether you're training horses or reading books. I chose you 44 years ago, and I choose you again every single day. That hasn't changed just because your body isn't cooperating." "I love you," Yancey said simply. "Have I told you that today?" "Only 3 times," Fiona replied with a smile, "but I never get tired of hearing it." They celebrated their 45th wedding anniversary in December of 1924, a quieter affair than some of the previous milestone celebrations, but no less meaningful. Their children and grandchildren visited throughout the day, and by evening Fiona and Yancey were exhausted but happy, sitting together in their favorite spot by the fireplace. 45 years, Yancey mused. "That's a lifetime." "It's our lifetime," Fiona corrected. "The best lifetime I could have imagined." "Tell me your favorite memory," Yancey requested, a game they played sometimes when the mood struck. "Just one, the one that stands out above all the others." Fiona thought for a long moment, sifting through decades of memories. Their wedding day. The births of their children. The first time Thomas had successfully trained a horse on his own. The day Eleanor had graduated from college. James's first published illustration. The evening they had sat on the mountainside and watched the sunset turn the sky to gold. "The night Marcus came to the saloon," she said finally, and Yancey looked at her in surprise. "Not because of him, because of what happened after. When everyone in that saloon chose to stand with me, when you stood between me and danger without hesitation. That was the moment I realized I had truly found home, not a place but people, a community, a man who saw me as worth protecting. That's when everything changed. For me it was simpler," Yancey said. "The moment I walked into the Silver Rose and saw you behind the bar trying so hard to be invisible, something in me just knew. This woman. This is the one I've been waiting for. I didn't know your story yet, didn't know what you had survived, but I knew you were important. That I wanted to spend my life learning all the things you were trying so hard to hide." They fell asleep in their chairs that night, hands clasped between them, the fire burning low. When Fiona woke near dawn, stiff from the awkward position, she found Yancey watching her with soft eyes. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, and even after 45 years the endearment still made her heart flutter. "Good morning yourself," Fiona replied, "though I suspect I look like something the cat dragged in after sleeping in a chair all night." "Still beautiful to me," Yancey insisted. "You always will be." The years continued their steady march. Yancey's health gradually improved, though he never regained his former strength. He adapted to his limitations, finding new ways to contribute to the ranch and the family. He taught his grandchildren about horses, passing on knowledge gained over a lifetime. He read voraciously, everything from newspapers to novels to technical journals about breeding and genetics. And he spent time with Fiona, more time than they had had in years, simply being together. In 1928, on a warm June afternoon, they held a party to celebrate the 50th anniversary of their first meeting. Not their wedding anniversary, which would not come until December, but the anniversary of the day Yancey had walked into the Silver Rose Saloon and changed both their lives forever. The celebration was held at the ranch, with most of Granite in attendance. Even Margaret Stone, now 96 years old but still sharp as a tack, made the journey from town with the help of her great-nieces. She pulled Fiona aside at one point, her rheumy eyes bright. "I knew," she said without preamble. "That first night when Yancey Kane walked into my saloon and looked at you like you hung the moon, I knew he was going to be your salvation. And I knew you were going to be his. Some people are just meant to find each other, and you two were always meant to be." "Thank you," Fiona said, hugging the old woman carefully. "Thank you for giving me a chance when I showed up in Granite with nothing but desperation and fear. Thank you for asking no questions and offering no judgment. You saved my life too, Margaret." "Nonsense," Margaret said gruffly, but Fiona could see she was pleased. "You saved yourself, girl. I just gave you a safe place to do it." That night, as the last guests departed and the ranch settled into peaceful quiet, Fiona and Yancey walked up into the foothills one more time. It took longer than it once had, their steps slower and more careful, but they made it to their special spot overlooking the valley. The sun was setting, painting the sky in the brilliant colors they had witnessed together countless times over the past 50 years. "Worth the climb?" Yancey asked, slightly breathless. "Always," Fiona replied. "This place is special to us. Where you told me you were falling in love with me. Where I admitted I was falling in love with you too. Where we've come back again and again to remember why we chose each other." "I'd choose you again," Yancey said seriously. "In every lifetime, in every version of reality, I'd choose you every single time. Even knowing about my past, about Marcus and the scars and all the brokenness I carried," Fiona asked. "Especially knowing all that," Yancey replied. "Your past made you who you are, Fiona. Strong and compassionate and resilient. You could have let what happened to you make you bitter and closed. Instead, you chose to heal, to love again, to build something beautiful from the ashes of something terrible. That takes more courage than I can even comprehend." They sat together until the stars emerged, holding hands and watching the lights of Granite begin to twinkle in the valley below. This town had been Fiona's refuge and her home, the place where she had learned to live instead of merely survive. And the man beside her had been her guide, her partner, her love through all of it. As they walked carefully back down the mountain in the gathering darkness, Fiona thought about the title of her life story, if such a thing could be said to have a title. She hid her scars and her past behind the saloon door. A cowboy walked in and saw only her future. It captured the essence of everything that had happened, the transformation from hiding to living, from fear to love, from survival to thriving. But it was incomplete, she realized. Because the future that Cowboy had seen was not something he had imposed upon her or created for her. It was something they had built together, equal partners choosing each other every day. Her future was not something he had given her. It was something they had forged together from hope and trust, and the kind of love that endures through decades and difficulties, and all the challenges life can present. In December of 1929, Fiona and Yancey celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. The entire family gathered once more, 3 generations strong, filling the ranch house with noise and laughter and love. There were great-grandchildren now, toddlers and babies who would carry the family forward into the future. During the dinner, Thomas stood to make a speech. "I've been thinking about what to say tonight," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "About my parents and their 50 years together. And I realized that the greatest gift they've given us isn't the ranch or the business or even the family itself. It's the example of what love should look like." He looked at Fiona and Yancey directly. "You've shown us that love is patient and kind, that it's choosing your partner every day, even when things are difficult, that it's seeing each other truly, scars and all, and loving the complete person you see. That it's building something together that's greater than what either of you could have built alone. That's the legacy you're leaving us. Not land or money or success, but the knowledge of what real love looks like." There was not a dry eye in the room by the time he finished. Fiona and Yancey stood together, and Yancey spoke quietly but clearly. "50 years ago, I walked into a saloon in this town and met a woman who was hiding from the world. She had every reason to stay hidden, every reason to never trust again. But she was brave enough to let me in, to risk her heart one more time, and together we built this." He gestured to the room full of family. "All of this exists because Fiona Fletcher chose to believe in possibility, because she chose to heal, because she chose me." He turned to Fiona, taking her hands. "I said it 50 years ago, and I'll say it again now. I love you. I will always love you. You are the best choice I ever made, and I thank God every day that I walked into that saloon and found you." Fiona could not speak past the lump in her throat, so she simply kissed him while their family applauded and cheered. 50 years. Half a century. A lifetime of love and partnership and choosing each other through every challenge and triumph. That night, lying in bed with Yancey's arms around her, Fiona felt the peaceful contentment of a life well lived. She had survived things that should have destroyed her. She had rebuilt herself from nothing. She had found love when love seemed impossible, had built a family when she thought family was lost to her forever, had created a legacy that would outlive her by generations. The scars on her back remained, faint now with age but still visible. But they were only one small part of her story. The larger story was the one she had written herself, with Yancey's help and support and unwavering love. A story of courage and healing, of second chances and hard-won happiness, of a future built from the ruins of a painful past. She closed her eyes. Yancey's heart beat steady beneath her ear, and felt grateful beyond measure for the cowboy who had walked through that saloon door 50 years ago and changed her life forever. The cowboy who had seen her worth when she could not see it herself, who had offered her a future when she was trapped in her past, who had loved her with a patience and gentleness that had slowly taught her to love herself. That was the real gift, she realized. Not that he had saved her, but that he had helped her learn to save herself. Not that he had given her a future, but that he had shown her how to build one. Not that he had loved her despite her scars, but that he had helped her understand those scars were proof of her strength, not evidence of her weakness. Fiona Fletcher Kane fell asleep that night in December 1929, surrounded by the family she and Yancey had created, knowing that she had lived a life beyond her wildest dreams. A life built on love and trust, and the simple courage to keep choosing hope, even when fear seemed easier. A life that proved the past does not have to dictate the future, that healing is possible, that love can bloom even in the most wounded of hearts. And when she woke the next morning to find Yancey already awake and watching her with the same soft expression he had worn for 50 years, she knew beyond any doubt that she would choose this life, this man, this love, over and over again for as long as she drew breath. She had hidden her scars and her past behind the saloon door all those years ago. A cowboy had walked in and seen only her future. And together, They had made that future more beautiful than anything she could have imagined alone.